How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Are you with the media too?
I'm Director of Public Information Services.
Director of Public Information, good.
Dr. Kissinger, events have been moving very rapidly following the Moscow meetings on arms limitation. What do you think of Premier Gorbachev's proposal for withdrawing the short-range missiles from East Germany and Czechoslovakia?
Well, I'm not opposed to his withdrawing his missiles from East Germany and Czechoslovakia. I'm opposed to withdrawing American missiles from West Germany and Western Europe. We have to remember that the Soviets have about 90 divisions and a very strong mobilization potential. We have 16 divisions. NATO is significantly inferior in conventional strength, and for 50 years or 40 years the peace of Europe has been maintained because the Soviets faced the danger of nuclear war. We cannot let them, in the name of arms control, suddenly denuclearize Europe and get a tremendous advantage in conventional forces. If they were to disband their tank armies, if there were limitations on the number of troops they could put forward, then we might have a basis for negotiation. I hope very much that somebody says we need a certain number of conventional nuclear weapons in Europe, or we're going to, all of NATO is going to go down the drain.
You think we're using the wrong approach?
No, I think frankly it was a mistake to offer. I'm not opposed to reducing weapons. I'm opposed to having no American nuclear weapons in Europe, because the problem is that the Soviet nuclear weapons get withdrawn just a few hundred miles into the Soviet Union. Ours get withdrawn thousands of miles into the United States. The Soviet Union can threaten Europe as a nation. We have to defend it as an ally. It's a psychological inequality. It is the wrong approach to go to zero.
British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher said the same thing to Premier Gorbachev last week.
She's right.
She said without the nuclear deterrent, we'd have chaos in the world.
She's right.
Okay. Do you think we'll reach some accord with this arms limitation talk?
Yes, but only if we talk like Mrs. Thatcher did.
It appears that the Reagan administration is very anxious to have a summit meeting in Washington. Are we going to sacrifice?
Too anxious.
Are we going to sacrifice something for this approach?
I hope not, and I don't see any reason to. I think that Gorbachev wants to come to Washington. I think the less we talk about it, the more likely he is to come. He knows we want that he's welcome here. Now it's up to him.
When a letter is offered to a head of state, as Secretary Shultz did this week to Premier Gorbachev to visit Washington, aren't there feelers so that there would be some accord, some positive reaction rather than an outright rejection?
Well, that's what one would expect, but he's coming. I wouldn't. He's using this to blackmail us, and he wants to use this to make sure there is some agreement that he can sign. This is one-upmanship. I will stake anything on the proposition that before the end of this year, Gorbachev will be in Washington, and I'll stake only a little less on the proposition that before the end of next year, President Reagan will be in Moscow.
Premier Gorbachev says he doesn't want this to be another stroll if he does come to Washington, referring, of course, to Reykjavik. If he does come to Washington, what kind of an accord do you foresee?
There'll be an accord on medium-range missiles that's agreed to in principle. And, you know, it's a great thing if, like Gorbachev, you can state a demand as a condition that you know is already fulfilled. It's easy to score victories that way.
Don't we view their short-range missiles as long-range missiles?
No, I view their...
I mean it's medium-range missiles.
The distinction between short-range and medium and strategic missiles depends on the number of boosters you attach to the warhead, and boosters can be added and discarded in a matter of minutes. And anyway, they are very close by. They have about 20,000 warheads altogether, so whether they withdraw a few hundred from Europe is really does not affect the European nuclear danger.
The Russians have insisted that any arms reduction be tied in with the Strategic Defense Initiative. First, what are your views?
Strategic reduction.
Yes. What is your view of the
I favor the
SDI?
Strategic Defense Initiative. I think it is inconceivable that one can live in a nuclear world and does nothing to protect one's population. That's absolutely irresponsible. And why are the Soviets so opposed to the Strategic Defense Initiative? Because it eliminates or reduces their capacity for nuclear blackmail. So I favor the Strategic Defense Initiative, and I think with goodwill it can be incorporated into negotiations in such a way that realistic progress is possible.
They want us to keep our testing within the laboratory. This is
Well,
one of
they
the
want us-
preconditions.
They first don't want us to deploy it, then they want to get restrictions on our testing. If we meet their conditions, it will never happen. How can you test a space defense in a laboratory? It's absurd.
Of course, they deny having tested an SDI of their own, but there are reports that they have.
Well, let's put the thing separately. Whether they have or not, we have to look after our own security. What is certainly clear is they have built an air defense system around Moscow. They have graciously agreed that we could build sensors by which you can pick up incoming missiles. That's a great thing. Since we have nothing on the ground, and since they won't let us put things in space, putting sensors into space enables them to hook up their sensors with their ground defense. So I think they are, as of now, ahead of us in strategic defense. If we worked at it hard, because it's high technology, we would certainly get ahead of them. I am not bothered by the fact of being ahead of the Soviets in something. It's a peculiar notion that that it is bad for us to be ahead.
Apparently, we must be making some strides because they are nervous about the SDI
They
initiative.
surely would not keep pressing it, but I'm not saying that we should just go ahead without being willing to negotiate. I do say we cannot give them a veto over our deployments.
There appears to be a new spirit of cooperation coming out of Moscow, and you recently spent 3 hours with Premier Gorbachev. How did you size up the man, and what direction do you think the negotiations between our two countries would
I think
take?
he's a brilliant man. He's a different type from any we have seen before. I think, however, that we have to judge him by what he does in foreign policy, not by what he does in domestic policy. And I do not yet in foreign policy see any sign of any major change in his policy. The proposals he's been making are to the Soviet advantage.
The Nuclear Proliferation Treaty expires in 8 years. What do you foresee when this happens?
Well, it's hard to foresee now, but I hope it will be renewed.
Do you think it will be renewed?
I think there'll be many pressures not to renew it.
How many countries in the world do you think now have the bomb? Do you think South Africa, Israel, and Pakistan have the bomb too?
I think certainly India, China, France, and Britain have the bomb. It's very possible that Israel has the bomb. It's probable that South Africa is close to it, and Pakistan is a little bit behind.
Of course, your area of expertise is worldwide, but especially in the Middle East. How do you think that we're going to come out of the Iran Gate affair and renew our prestige in the Middle East?
Well, I think in the Middle East, very little can be done before the end of the Reagan administration. For a president who's leaving office to get started on a Mideast negotiation when the passions are so deep, and when above all there is no clear fulcrum, no clear associate with which we can work. In my day, we had President Sadat, who was a great man with great vision, representing a big country. Right now, the man we have to work with is King Hussein, who is a fine man, very courageous, but representing a very vulnerable and exposed society. So I don't think anything significant can be done in the next year and a half.
I'd like to ask you one final question, and it's been hashed and rehashed in the past week, but that is embassy security. Did we overreact to the problem with our embassies?
Well, no, it's really hard to overreact when you when you have an embassy that was built in part with Russian labor that is one huge recording studio, and when you find out that the Marines, whom nobody had suspected before, had been a weak link and that Russian KGB agents had been running around our embassy, something has to be done about assuring security, but it's our responsibility. I mean, the Russians behave like Russians, and if we can't protect ourselves, then that is importantly our own fault.
Well, I understand the Russians won't accept a load of cement in Washington for the construction of their new embassy unless they can inspect it.
Right.
Why can't we demand the same conditions
should.
in Moscow?
We absolutely should.
Ray Klein, embassy intelligence officer in the Nixon administration, said on the Ted Koppel Nightline program that he sent you a memo in 1972.
Listen, everybody says they sent me memos. When you are Secretary of State, every memo gets addressed to the Secretary of State, and therefore, theoretically, it is possible. In 1972, we had the Vietnam War, we had a Middle East crisis, we had the Vietnamese offensive, we had the opening to China, we had a trip to the summit. And I wasn't Secretary of State, I was security advisor. I don't know whether his memo ever got past his own Secretary of State. And this is one of these things, whenever something goes wrong, you can always find some wise guy who said he wrote a memo. The same guy probably wrote a memo in the opposite direction too, which he doesn't surface. So the fundamental decision about the embassy, in fact, was made in the Johnson administration, not in the Nixon administration. I didn't know that myself until I started looking into the papers.
So the condition the world was in that period, construction of an embassy would have been low
No,
priority.
but the construction of the embassy, the basic decision was made in the Johnson administration, wasn't made in the Nixon administration. And the final agreement was signed in the Carter administration, and I bet my last cent that this was done between technicians, and nothing ever went to the White House in any administration.
Do you think we should tear down the present construction and
This
rebuild?
depends on what the technicians are saying. I think we have a good bargaining position because in an agreement that was signed when I was in office, the Soviets cannot move into their embassy until we move into ours. So we should be very hard-nosed in negotiating about it.
Yeah. Thank you very much, sir.